You think it is about Klarna makes debt feel like. But the truth is worse. The mechanism only needs your brain to feel behind. A small warning, a better option beside yours. A tiny friction point that makes the old choice feel unreliable. None of it needs to force a decision. They posted in r/shopping addiction. Klarna is evil. Not because they were deceived, but because the bill felt completely disconnected from any decision they remembered making. That gap between buying and paying isn't a flaw in the product. It's the product. Sever the sting and spending accelerates. The debt wasn't hidden. It was just deferred long enough that the brain stopped treating it as real, until $850 showed up every single month, like clockwork. Research shows consumers perceive interest-free installments as an immediate full payment, even though the final cost is identical. Here's the psychological script running in the background. When the sting of paying gets detached from the actual transaction, your brain stops connecting the two. Academic research on BNPL found the effect holds even when users know, consciously, that installments are coming. Awareness doesn't override how the brain processes it. The cost didn't shrink. The feeling of paying did. That's what's happening. And once you can name it, it gets harder for it to run you. Your brain doesn't track what you owe. It tracks what payment felt like. And if payment felt small, the debt feels small. That's not a glitch. That's the product. When the moment you consume something is separated from the moment you pay for it, the brain stops connecting the two. That's the core of how this works. Research on BNPL confirms it. Splitting payments doesn't reduce what you owe. It reduces how much your brain registers owing it. The number stays the same. When pain and pleasure are separated in time, the brain discounts the pain almost to zero. Klarna didn't change your math. It changed your felt experience of the math. $26.9 billion. That's the Federal Reserve's estimate for Klarna's U.S. gross merchandise volume in 2025. Processed one small installment at a time. That figure comes from Klarna's share of a $128 billion global GMV, documented in a Federal Reserve economic note published in 2026. Every single transaction in that $26.9 billion passed through a checkout interface engineered to shrink the perceived total, not by accident, but by construction. The perception gap isn't a glitch. At $26.9 billion, the decoupling of price from pain is the product, and your brain never gets a receipt for the full number. No interest sounds like a gift. But every financial product has a cost center. The question is just who absorbs it and what they get in return. Credit cards can charge up to 30% interest in the US. Klarna charges 0 on Pay in 4. That gap has to live somewhere. And it does. The merchant pays. Retailers give Klarna a cut of every sale because Klarna delivers something credit cards cannot. A buyer who already committed before the sticker shock landed. So the cost is real. It just lands on the retailer who folds it into product pricing. The consumer pays indirectly and never sees what's happening. Remove the sting of paying, and spending quietly accelerates. That mild friction normally acts as a brake. When payment is split into 4 future installments, that brake fades. The felt cost of the transaction is detached from the moment of decision, so the decision feels smaller than it is. This is exactly what the merchant fee model relies on. According to NCLC research, Klarna's primary revenue comes from merchants, not consumers. The product isn't free. The cost was rerouted through your actions. Higher purchase frequency is the fee. You just never saw it on the invoice. Payment decoupling doesn't work alone. Underneath it runs a second process, one that actively protects the first from being interrupted. Under financial pressure, people measurably choose not to check their balance. Not laziness, not forgetfulness. Academic research on financial strain confirmed it. Subjects under pressure showed active, measurable avoidance of their own financial status. The less you look, the more manageable the fiction holds. The balance isn't unknown. It's protected. That's not avoidance. That's self-preservation. A Reddit user in r/personal finance spotted something the fine print almost hides. Klarna lets you extend a debt, which sounds helpful, until you realize what it actually does to the numbers. When you extend, the loan doesn't age, it resets. A payment that was days from delinquency gets reclassified, not as missed, but as current. The books look clean. Regulators noticed this pattern too. When extensions systematically prevent delinquency flags, the reported default rate stops measuring actual repayment stress. Once you can name that, the clean books framing gets a lot harder to read at face value. Klarna's own numbers confirmed what individual stories suggested. In 2024, they disclosed a 17% rise in consumer credit losses year over year. Their explanation? Significant expansion of new credit issuance. More users approved, more balances extended. The growth engine and the loss engine were the same engine. More users, more defaults, more extensions. That pattern, growth masking fragility, isn't accidental. It's the construction of a product built on deferred consequence. The aggregate signal always mirrors the individual one. When millions defer the same decision, the losses aggregate too, and the numbers stop being abstract. The New York Times called it a delirious new culture of consumption, users describing a genuine feeling of living luxuriously, right up until the installments stacked. The process is precise. 4 installments feels like a discount, not a debt. Your brain registers the first payment and files the rest as a future problem it won't have to solve today. This is present preference, the tendency to weight immediate pleasure far more heavily than future cost. BNPL doesn't exploit a weakness. It exploits how time feels. The fine print was always there. What wasn't there was a moment in the interface for your brain to feel the full weight of what it was agreeing to. A Reddit user in r/shopping addiction paid off Klarna, Affirm, and Afterpay, then maxed them all out again. Not once, repeatedly. Budgets didn't hold. Willpower didn't hold. The cycle only broke when the accounts were canceled entirely, the option removed, not managed. When the frictionless path is always available, resistance is a tax you pay every single day. Pause before paying. The account being there was the problem. Once it was gone, there was nothing to resist. That's what's happening, not a personal failing. Keep the list visible. Klarna never targeted your spending. It targeted 0.4 seconds. The checkout pause your brain uses to register consequence before committing. Research confirms interest-free installments replicate the sensation of full, immediate payment, erasing the friction that normally slows the decision down. Remove that pause, and the choice isn't really yours anymore. It's the default, the path of least cognitive resistance, engineered in advance by someone else's revenue model. The only thing that returns the pause to you is recognizing that it was removed. Once you can name what's happening, it gets harder for it to run you. If this changed how you see money, subscribe for more wealth psychology stories.